The number on my home blood pressure cuff said 152/94. I had written it down on a scrap of paper before I drove to my appointment that morning, and I handed it to my doctor across the desk like I was submitting evidence. He looked at the number, looked at me, and said we needed to talk about adding a second medication. I was 62 years old. I drove home with that folded piece of paper still in my jacket pocket, and for the first time I sat down at the kitchen table and thought seriously about what the inside of my arteries might actually look like. What I had no idea about at the time was that a substantial body of research, published through NIH-funded programs and reviewed by the American Heart Association, had already mapped out how certain everyday foods interact with the body's own system for keeping blood vessels open and flexible. I had been eating around that research for 6 decades without knowing any of it existed. My name is Wayne Ellison. I am 68 years old. I am not a doctor, and this is educational, not medical advice. After that appointment in my early 60s, I started reading the actual studies myself, the kind there is no time to explain in a 10-minute visit. What I found changed what I put on my plate. I cannot tell you my experience is proof of anything for you. Physiology is personal. What I can tell you is that the research is real, and I want to walk through it the way nobody walked me through it. There is no money in teaching you the cheap answer. The supplement industry sells bottled nitric oxide precursors for $30 and $40 a month. The meal I eat for the same underlying purpose costs me about $2.50 to assemble at the grocery store. That math does not appear in any supplement advertisement. Here is what we are going to cover. 5 ingredients, what the research actually associates each one with, exactly what I do in my kitchen, the limitations you need to know, and what to bring to your own doctor, especially if you are on blood pressure or heart medication. Stay with me, because the third ingredient on this list is the one my own cardiologist told me had some of the strongest research he had seen in recent years. He said he almost never has a patient bring it up by name. I will get there, and I will tell you exactly what he said when I asked. How do you go from a doctor mentioning a second prescription to building a meal you still eat 6 years later? I started with one question. What does the body actually need to keep blood vessels working the way they are supposed to? The answer kept pointing back to a molecule called nitric oxide. Your arteries are lined by a thin layer of cells called the endothelium. That layer produces nitric oxide, a signaling molecule that tells the smooth muscle surrounding your arteries to relax. When those muscles relax, blood moves through more easily and with less pressure against the vessel walls. The American Heart Association and a large body of NIH-published research recognize endothelial function as a central factor in cardiovascular health. The research also documents that as we get older, the body naturally produces less nitric oxide on its own. What we eat is one of the levers we can actually move. Now I want to walk you through the 5 things in the bowl. Number 1. Arugula. I had the same reaction you probably just had. But arugula has one of the highest concentrations of dietary nitrate of any salad green you can find at a regular grocery store. Dietary nitrate is the raw material the body converts into nitrite, and nitrite is what eventually becomes nitric oxide in your blood vessels. That conversion pathway is documented in research published through NIH channels and recognized by the American Heart Association. The way it works is worth slowing down for. Nitrate from arugula gets absorbed in your small intestine. Some of it circulates back to your salivary glands, where bacteria living in your mouth convert it to nitrite. You swallow that, it reaches your stomach and bloodstream, and your body uses it to generate nitric oxide in the walls of your arteries. I mean, think about that for a second. The bacteria in your mouth are doing part of the work of keeping your arteries flexible, which is why antibacterial mouthwash used right before eating a nitrate-rich meal can interfere with that entire conversion pathway. I found that in a published review paper on dietary nitrate metabolism, and it surprised me more than almost anything else I came across in the research. I add 2 or 3 large handfuls of arugula to my bowl most afternoons. Spinach and beet greens also rank high in dietary nitrate content, so if arugula is hard to find or you dislike the peppery bite, spinach works through the same pathway. The difference is personal preference. Either one works through the same nitrate to nitrite pathway. The limitation you need to know before making this a daily habit. If you take any medication for blood pressure, dietary nitrates may have an additive effect on your blood pressure numbers. That means your doctor needs to know you are doing this consistently. Talk to them first and walk into that appointment with a specific question in hand. A handful of researchers had been publishing on dietary nitrates and endothelial health since the early 1990s. The papers were indexed in the journals. Nobody was translating them for patients in a 10-minute office visit. That gap between the research and the waiting room is the whole reason I sit here and do this. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. I thought arugula alone would be the main story. One ingredient, solid evidence, done. And then I kept reading. Number 2. Garlic. I will be honest. I was skeptical when I first found garlic in the cardiovascular research. It felt like folk medicine dressed up in journal citations. But the mechanism that stopped me was specific enough that I could not dismiss it. Garlic has appeared in cardiovascular research for decades. The part that caught my attention was its connection to an enzyme called nitric-oxide synthase. That is the enzyme the body uses to produce nitric oxide directly from an amino acid called L-arginine. Research indexed on PubMed suggests that allicin, a compound formed when garlic is freshly chopped or crushed, may support the activity of nitric oxide synthase. Greater activity in that enzyme pathway may mean the body can produce more of its own nitric oxide, separate from the dietary nitrate route through arugula and beets. What I do is genuinely simple. I chop 1 or 2 cloves of raw garlic and let them rest on the cutting board for 8 to 10 minutes before I add them to the bowl. That resting period is not arbitrary. The enzymatic reaction that produces allicin requires a few minutes to complete after the cell walls are broken open. I found that detail in a food science paper, and it changed how I have handled garlic in my kitchen for the past 5 years. Chop it, set it aside, come back to it. Raw garlic is meaningfully different from cooked here. High heat degrades allicin relatively quickly. Garlic in a roasted dish is not working through the same mechanism. I am talking about raw, freshly chopped garlic stirred into the bowl just before I eat, which, looking back, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid the first time I tried it at noon. My wife had thoughts. What comes next is the part I still find most interesting in the research, even after 6 years of reading it. Number 3. Beets. This is the ingredient my cardiologist mentioned. I walked him through my new eating habits at a routine visit, and when I got to beets, he paused. He told me the research on beets and dietary nitrate had become genuinely strong in recent years, with multiple studies examining blood pressure and endothelial function specifically in older adults. He said he almost never has a patient bring it up by name. I asked him directly whether he ever recommended it himself. He said he would not tell a patient what to eat in a 10-minute appointment, but the research was available for anyone who wanted to read it. And somehow, it gets more compelling when you look at what else is in beets beyond the nitrate alone. Beets have an exceptionally high dietary nitrate content, among the highest of any commonly eaten vegetable. They also contain pigment compounds called betalains, which some research reviewed through NIH-accessible publications associates with antioxidant activity in the vascular system. The combination of high dietary nitrate and betalain compounds is part of why beetroot specifically, and not just any high-nitrate vegetable, has become a focus of cardiovascular diet research in older adults over the past 15 years. You do not need beet juice. I slice cooked beets, either canned or the pre-cooked vacuum-packed kind available at most grocery stores, and lay them across the top of the arugula. The dietary nitrate content survives cooking reasonably well. Fresh or lightly steamed beets preserve more of the betalain compounds, but for most of us, the pre-cooked version delivers most of the benefit without the mess of roasting a raw beet on a weekday afternoon. One safety consideration that is not optional. If you take a medication prescribed for chest pain in the drug category called organic nitrates, you need to talk to your doctor before significantly increasing your dietary nitrate intake. That interaction is a real clinical consideration. Bring it to your next appointment. Everything was in place at this point. The dietary nitrate from the arugula and beets, the garlic working through a separate enzyme pathway. I did not yet know what putting all 5 ingredients together every afternoon would mean for how I felt or what my numbers would look like at the next visit. But I am getting ahead of the story. If you are working on your own numbers and you have stayed this far, drop your age and the specific number you are watching in the comments. I read every one. And if this has been useful, subscribing takes 2 seconds. Alright, so here is where things get more precise. Number 4. Extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil gets mentioned in so many heart health conversations that it can start to sound like background noise. So yeah, not great that the actual mechanism often gets buried under the general recommendation. The research is more specific than the advice suggests, and it is worth knowing what you are actually getting. Extra virgin olive oil contains polyphenols, plant compounds that research published through NIH-funded channels associates with endothelial function and with reducing oxidative stress in blood vessel walls. The Mediterranean dietary pattern, which uses extra virgin olive oil as its primary fat, has been examined in the cardiovascular literature more extensively than almost any other dietary approach. The American Heart Association includes extra virgin olive oil as a recommended source of unsaturated fat as of 2026. The polyphenols that show up most in the research, oleocanthal and oleorupine, are more concentrated in extra virgin than in refined or light olive oil. Less processing means more of those compounds survive into the bottle. I use 2 tablespoons over the bowl along with fresh lemon juice and a small amount of salt. The calorie reality is worth naming. 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil is approximately 240 calories. If you are managing weight alongside blood pressure or cardiovascular risk, that is not a number to ignore. I am not going to pretend the oil is without consequence. What I will say is that the polyphenol research is specific enough that I consider 2 tablespoons worth including, and the fat content makes the meal filling enough that I am not looking for something else an hour later. Now, I could have stopped at 4 ingredients. I did not. Number 5. Walnuts. The American Heart Association, as of 2026, lists walnuts among its heart-healthy food recommendations, specifically because of their alpha-linolenic acid content. Alpha-linolenic acid is a plant-based omega-3 fatty acid, and omega-3 fatty acids are associated in a large body of research with supporting healthy blood vessel function, including endothelial health. Walnuts also contain L-arginine, the same amino acid that nitric oxide synthase uses as raw material for producing nitric oxide. I am not going to overstate that connection. The research on dietary L-arginine and blood-level nitric oxide in humans is complicated, and the amounts in a single serving of walnuts are modest. What I can say is that walnuts appear consistently in the cardiovascular diet literature. The American Heart Association endorses them specifically, and they add a texture and satiety to the bowl that makes the whole thing something I actually look forward to eating. I measure out about 1 ounce, which works out to roughly 14 walnut halves. I weighed it every day until the portion became something I could eyeball with reasonable accuracy. 1 ounce. That is the amount I land on. If I had decided at that kitchen table 6 years ago that a second pill was the only available answer, this conversation would not exist. I am not saying medication is wrong. Medication matters, and your doctor understands your situation in a way I never could from a video. What I am saying is that the research on dietary nitrates, endothelial function, and cardiovascular-friendly eating had been sitting in the journals for years. Nobody had time to walk me through it across a desk. Here is where I land. A bowl with arugula, sliced cooked beets, freshly chopped raw garlic rested for 10 minutes, extra virgin olive oil, and a 1 ounce handful of walnuts. That is the meal. It costs under $3. The research behind each ingredient spans decades of NIH-published work and is recognized in varying degrees by the American Heart Association. None of it cures anything. None of it replaces your medication or your doctor. None of this costs me a fortune, and none of it is a miracle. What it is food that the research associates with supporting the body's own nitric oxide system. That is a system worth understanding once you are past 60 and watching your numbers. Here is what I want you to do. Write down the 5 ingredients. Write down the specific questions you want to raise at your next appointment, particularly about dietary nitrates if you take blood pressure medication, and about omega-3 sources if your doctor has mentioned cardiovascular risk. Bring that list to the office. You paid for the appointment. Use the 10 minutes. If this helped you, subscribe and tell me in the comments what number you are working on. I read every one. There is something my cardiologist said at that routine visit that I think about when I sit down with this bowl at noon. He told me he wished more patients came in with specific questions. Not just, is olive oil good for me? But, the review I read said polyphenols support endothelial function. Does that interact with what I am already taking? A specific question, he said, gets a real answer. A vague question gets a pamphlet. That is what this channel is for. Bring the specific question. You deserve a real answer. If today's topic connects with something you have been turning over, I put together a full video on the 2 foods I added after my own artery scare and the exact question I brought to my cardiologist at that follow-up visit. Tap it on the end card right now and keep watching. It picks up right where this one leaves off.